you're typically not there for the story, you're there for the game. And so you're writing in the margins, and the environment is a terrific margin to write in.
Hi there, my name is Stephen Lake and welcome to the Examined Game. Today we're talking with Erik Wolpaw, the veteran Valve writer whose credits include Portal 1 and 2, Half-Life 2 Episodes 1 and 2, Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, Half-Life Alyx and Psychonauts. So I got to speak with Erik about world building on a budget. It's a brilliant conversation that really highlights the importance of writing in a video game. Portal is such a great game mechanically, and it's the writing that we hear as we enter these different spaces that really builds out this world and gets more and more fleshed out. We also talk about the pressure that comes from writing a funny game and how important writing is, especially when you're doing it from the margins, so as not to detract from people's desire to basically push forward through the game itself. Please rate the episode if you enjoy it. Thank you very much. What's a good early kind of like gaming, not necessarily video games, but just like example of play or interaction or books or something that you can, comes to mind from your sort of younger years? You can kind of draw a line from that point to what you ended up going on to do with your work.
Yeah, it's kind of the earliest memory I have of like gaming is there was a bookstore down at the end of our street when I was a kid, a couple blocks away, and they had Avalon Hill games, and I would walk over there every day and look. There's a Starship Troopers game, Avalon Hill old Starship Troopers game that had, for whatever reason, the cover of it just spoke to me. Like I was fascinated with this. And eventually I managed to talk my parents into buying it. And I can't remember. I mean, I was way too young for it. And even today, I eventually bought a copy on eBay a few years ago. And I mean, the rules are just, it's not a especially streamlined game.
Is it
So
like a
there were,
tabletop game? Is it
yeah,
like
well, an actual board game, Avalon Hill
okay, yeah.
tabletop. But that kind of led me to, it came with a catalog of other Avalon Hill games. And there were some that were tagged as like beginner. And so I uh, got one called Tactics 2 after that, which was more my speed, but I didn't really have anyone to play it with, so I just would, play it myself. It is a war game, simple with little, pieces and those, the war gamey markings on them that I don't even know. They're like little squares. They're like military markings. Anyway, so that put me on the path of, yeah, I don't know. I come from a family on my dad's side of lawyers. My dad was a lawyer. His dad was a lawyer. All his dad's brothers were lawyers. So they're people interested in interpreting rules systems. So but instead of becoming a lawyer, I just went the gaming route. But I think there's a similar impulse there to navigate and think about rule systems.
Can you elaborate on that a little more? Because it makes total sense. It's just, it's not one of those careers that, I'm always
Yeah,
interested in what people's parents did, but I've never made that connection about why
it's just,
lawyering.
when you think about, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't exactly, I grew up around lawyers, but, they look at sets of rules and case histories, and I think to be a good lawyer, you have to be sort of fascinated with reading through these things and looking for, thinking about how they work and arguing about them. And I feel like rules for games are similar. You've got rules and, there's arguments about them, and you have to like thinking about them. I like board games a lot, but I'm happy to just sit and read board game rules, and never play them. There's just something fascinating about the structure of rules to me. I can't explain it more than it sort of speaks to me. Uh, and I just feel like I don't know that it's, I don't know if being interested in rules is genetic, but clearly I come from a family of people that were mostly lawyers, the men.
And then in terms of, were you sort of interested in writing from a young age as well?
Yeah. I always would write things just to entertain friends or myself. And throughout, the, I still have it. I think it's from the fourth or fifth grade, we would get, instead of report cards, they were just a little piece of paper that had a written, like, here's how he did. And it was an English class, and I still have it. I remember it clearly, and also still have it, that the teacher's comment was, Eric is very good at entertaining himself, which sounds like a compliment, but I don't think it was meant that way. But that's kind of what it was. Whenever I thought I could get away with it, and even if I didn't think I could get away with it, I would take whatever project we were working on and kind of ignore 90% of what we were asked to do and just write something that I thought was entertaining. In fact, I didn't actually graduate high school because instead of writing the final paper that we were supposed to write, I just wrote. I put a lot of effort into it. 30 pages of gags basically, and so I thought I was going to get away with it because I basically, if the teacher had failed me on this paper, I would have gotten through with a D. Like, I was doing well enough otherwise, but there's a lot of information about this. But instead she gave me an incomplete, which was kind of a checkmate move, which meant I just couldn't graduate. So I went and got my GED like the next week, which is, I don't know, in the US, that's like the high school. You can just take a test and
Sure. Yeah.
So I went through all 12 years. I just kind of, that last little hump, again, because of my desire to entertain myself, I guess. But that was always centered around like writing. Yeah. Or assembling like kind of little multimedia things that I thought were fun. That was how I got motivated to do things.
And then is there like an obvious line or pattern there to why specifically video games?
I mean, games were just, there was a parallel route of, we were interested in, we being my friends all through, grade school and high school, we typically were interested in two things, which were making each other laugh and games. That was kind of the through line. And so, yeah, throughout all this from, Pong, Atari, DC, I was obsessed with games, and the writing was sort of secondary, which is, eventually ended up writing about games. Because I programmed, I taught myself to program when I was a kid, but couldn't really make it, especially now that I've worked professionally at game companies with people who just have a natural talent for it. I never had full natural talent for programming. I could do it. I could do some, and I was okay, but not great like the people I work with. So that wasn't going to be my into the industry. I might have just assumed at some point that I wasn't ever going to work in the industry. But then one thing led to another, and it turned out that without knowing it, I kind of had the perfect set of experiences and knowledge to be good at this one specific thing, which was writing for games. I suppose even, in the period that I was most active writing for games.
Do you game a lot?
Oh,
still?
Yeah, a ton. Yeah, like I'm eager to try the Vampire Survivor, their new game. Their like a card game came out today. I've been playing Neo 3 a ton. Eugenics actually these last few weeks it's been huge. Yeah, but I still, my love of games never left me. Slay the Spire 2, I cannot wait.
Wait for what? Sorry. Oh, Slay the Spire. Yeah.
But yeah, I play a lot of games. I play board games a lot. Yeah, I just love games. About you? You playing anything now?
I'm playing. I actually just finally finished. It's the first time I've completed a JRPG in years. The Final Fantasy VII remake, the first one.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I felt very proud of myself. What else am I playing? I'm still chipping away at Clair Obscur. And it's actually a while, but for some reason it just came to mind because you talk about writing. There's a game. It's a text. Is it text parser, text phaser game? Parser, where you sort of type called the Crimson Diamond, and it's one of these. I don't know if you remember the Laura Bow mystery games from back in the day, the
No. You know what?
Sierra ones.
Adventure game. Adventure for ending up finding my way into the game industry mostly through writing. I typically play story light games that are.
Mm,
It's just there are the Yakuza games for some reason. The stories in those really draw me in. I love those, but a lot of story heavy games I don't play. But adventure games, I just don't have the brain for the kind of puzzle structure of adventure
sure.
games. So those ones never got their hooks in me.
I
Uh,
go back to them. The thing for me, whenever and particularly that game, as you'll see with the artwork, if I'm playing an adventure game, it's because I have a strong desire to regress, and sort of trying to go back to, just my much younger self, and try and tap into whatever that feeling of wonder was back then.
yeah.
But surprisingly kind of action and RPG centered nowadays. I actually just started Avowed.
Oh, I played some. I played Avowed for a while. I was enjoying it. This was must have been 6 months ago. I also played Claire Obscure, not to the finish, but I was enjoying the story in that. It was a rare game that had a lot of story. But I also thought mechanically that the combat system in Claire Obscure was pretty entertaining. That sort of rhythm based um, combat system. I don't know why
I,
I
I
gave up.
I sort of hated it at first, and then I fell in love with it. Not the story, but the mechanic. But once I got my head around it, I was just like completely sold on it.
And Avowed, if I remember right, had a, I mean, not as unique a system, but it was pretty solid combat in Avowed as well. Uh,
It feels it for a sort of first person RPG. Yeah.
yeah, I love all the, I mean, the Souls games, love them. And I like that they're all story light for the most. I mean, there's lots of story if you feel like digging through the lore and the item
Mm.
descriptions and everything, but uh, yeah, the all the From games are I love 'em. My son and I have been playing Night Rain. Well, we haven't played probably in 2 months now, but we wrung a lot of entertainment out of Night Rain as well.
How old is he? Just out of interest.
He's 15.
Okay. I was interested for context of what age someone's out on their gaming journey.
Yeah, he's it was interesting because I was still working at Valve when he was young. I mean, like in Bellevue, down there. And we would go to Valve every weekend. He just spent a lot of time, kids are always hanging out at Valve, but he was too young to kind of appreciate it at the time. And
Mm.
now, like he likes TF2 so about 6 months ago, I had to go to Valve for a week. And so I brought him with me, and that was exciting for him because he was able to go now, appreciating, oh, it's Valve. So I was glad that he was able to have that experience, before he was 18. How old are your kids?
Uh, 19 and 17.
Oh, so
So
yeah, I mean, they're getting older. Are they
yeah,
gamers as well? I assume any teenager probably is.
but like yeah, grew up, loved gaming, and just like his friends online and playing, Call of Duty and things like that. And then gravitating more into kind of like single player stuff more recently. And then I played a lot of Switch, introduced her to like Stardew Valley.
Hmm.
She's put a crazy amount of time into. And then we play a lot of the Split Fiction and the other one they did before. I hate that one. I forget the name of games.
Oh, It Takes Two, is
It
that?
Takes Two, yeah. So anything sort of co-op-y that isn't too contentious, so we don't fall out of each other while we're playing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's been a big bonding point for us, especially them being like my stepkids. So it was kind of like, when you're trying to find common ground, at that early point of the relationship, you're like, oh, do you
Yeah. How
play
young
video
were they
games?
when you first?
They weren't actually too young, so they're like 12 and 14. So
Okay.
that age where it's sort of like, they're not young enough, or they're just gonna like
Right.
like you
Yeah.
out the gate. So you sort of got to find something to I know you've obviously talked about it before, but maybe just to sort of go over what that journey was from, obviously you writing about games first and then.
Oh, sure. So it started with uh, my friend and at the time business partner. We were running a database marketing company together. Or it's more it's sort of a database management company. Um, it wasn't big; it was just the two of us. But that was in Cleveland. But we started initially as a way to test some web database stuff. We made uh, a website that was about games called Old Man Murray, and that we just kept doing it, and it was fun, and it was something we did. We liked writing, and this was letting us, put writing out in front of somebody. We weren't sure who, but the site kind of caught on after about a year of us working on it. In the early internet, and from there it got noticed by some editors at GameSpot and a few other places. So I started writing for them. And one of the editors, Ron Doolin at GameSpot, uh, they were in San Francisco, knew Tim Schafer, and he knew Old Man Murray, but he was also looking for someone who could help him write on Psychonauts, which was the game Double Fine was working on at the time, and also do a little bit of programming, which was, again, that was right up my alley. So, I flew down to San Francisco and spent a day with Tim, and we hit it off. And so I worked on Psychonauts for about a year, uh, and then left Double Fine and moved. Anyway, we moved back to Minnesota, my wife and I. And meanwhile, people at Valve had been uh, readers of Old Man Murray, and we had corresponded with Gabe and other people at Valve. And after my wife and I had moved to Minnesota, Chet and I got an email from Gabe saying, "Would you like to come down to Valve? We're looking to hire some writers, and we like what you guys have done in the past." And this was before Psychonauts had come out. I don't think he knew that that I worked on Psychonauts, or that Psychonauts would even turn out to be a decent game.
Mm.
So we went to Valve. This was in late 2004, maybe September of 2004. And we spent a couple days at Valve, talked to people, and they hired us. And so we started in November, I believe, of 2004. Right after, it was like a week or two after Half-Life 2 shipped. So the studio was in kind of resting mode. Everybody was pretty wiped out from shipping Half-Life. And then that's kind of it. That's where I've been since 2004. I just stayed at Valve.
And what was your first project that you started to get hands on with there?
Well, when we got there, there was a initiative there's a thing called SFM, which is Source Filmmaker, which they were just starting with, and they wanted
Mm.
to do some shorts with Source Filmmaker. So they initially hired Chet and I to do work on these shorts, which was fine. None of these ones ever came out, the ones we were initially working on. Uh, but both Chet and I were more interested in games, and you're tantalizingly close to working on some games. So what we ended up doing was fairly quickly after, well, in Valve terms, fairly quickly, but it probably took about 8 or 9 months of us spinning our wheels on these SFM shorts. But they were starting. Episode 1 was being worked on, Half-Life episode 1, and then came out relatively early in our time there. But even before that, they were working on episode 2 and Team Fortress 2 and Portal. And so both of us I transitioned over to Portal 1 exclusively, and Chet was more working on the episodes with Mark Laidlaw. And then Chet and I were together working on TF2 at the time. And so they're
Mm.
mainly that the first major thing we were sort of involved, Chet more so involved in shipping episode one, but really the orange box was the real first thing. So that was, 3 titles plus shipping, reshipping a couple other titles. I guess episode one and Half-Life 2 were both in that box as well.
It was a wonderful box.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
it was something. It didn't seem so strange at the time that you would ship. Even though I think it was even at the time. Uh, but the crazy thing is I was talking to Chet. Well, actually, it's been a couple months now, but that people forget people were angry about it when we announced it, partly because we had said there was going to be a black box and an orange box, and the black box wasn't going to have Half-Life 2 and Episode 1 because you might already have that. And then at some point they were just like, look, we're just going to ship it all together. But they were like, we could have got, I thought it was going to be the black box for $10 less. But I think once it came out, people were happy. They got their money's worth with.
I mean, it's something I haven't thought about a lot, because I mainly just think about the games themselves, but the episodes in Portal, of which I was exposed to at that time. But and this wasn't on my sort of list of questions, but it just comes to mind. I mean, in terms of like, do you know how much forethought was put into that as this kind of packaging idea, or was it kind of one of these like, let's just, because it was a
There
pretty
was.
special thing.
I don't think I was privy to those conversations, even though Valve was. It's still pretty small, but back then, I don't know exactly. I think it was like 60 people total. Were working there, but I do know the most amount of thought that I was around was the poor guy Greg Coomer, who was in charge of making the cover art for it, because there was almost no way to do it to not make it look like some sort of Walmart value pack. You had these
I got to look it up
three
because I
wildly
remember it.
different IPs, kind of packaged together. So yeah, I don't know exactly how. Clearly somebody thought about it, but I think part of it too was just we were in the position, as small as we were, that these three things were going to be done more or less at the same time. It was clear that that was a possibility. And I think they were just thinking, this would be cool. And partly because maybe, episode 2, Team Fortress 2, and Portal were sort of smaller than a typical full release. Although when you put the three of them together, they're sort of bigger than a full release. But so I think that may have factored into it a little bit too. Although at this point I'm just guessing.
And just something comes to mind. I was just wondering, you spoke about the early writing and just the idea of doing stuff to make your friends laugh, and obviously like comedy and humor is the channel with which he was able to very well communicate sort of stories, and I was just interested to say with Psychonauts and obviously Portal, both of which games that are extraordinarily sort of funny amongst many other things. Were those sort of was that the intention? Like was the sort of the driving narrative for Portal always going to be something that was like very humorous, or was just that was your kind of the way that you all decided to take it?
Yeah, that's my default mode of right where I'm comfortable. So, and for Psychonauts, obviously I was hired because it was a game that was, Tim writes funny games. He wanted somebody to write funny. With Portal, it could have gone anyway. I'm not sure that the Narbacular Drop team, /Portal team, had an idea one way or the other. But, once they dropped me into it, I was like, I may as well lean on whatever my quote unquote strengths are. Like, why make this harder than it needs to be? Plus, I just thought that seemed to be the way to go. So it wasn't planned that way, but once everybody was quickly on board with it. There was nobody who was like, I think this needs to be significantly more serious,
Is there I can't imagine there's something much more pressureful than I feel like humor in a game, like especially if someone pegs it, oh, this is supposed to be like a funny game. It's sort of it's the sort of thing that I think can make a player sort of want to sit back and be like, go on then, like prove it to me,
Yeah,
like
it's it's rough for sure. Less rough in Portal because it was a little bit, it wasn't necessarily sold as that.
Yeah.
Um, Probably harder when it came to Portal 2 because people knew that, there was going to be some humor in it. But yeah, it's a constant, it's a challenge, for sure.
It's just something I feel like everyone's just comparing every game that's got a hint of humor to it to like Monkey Island, which is sort of
Yeah. Yeah, it's you're going against, although with games, especially at the time, you weren't going against that many memorable ones. So the
mm,
field was still sort of open. Yeah, like you said, most of the ones that were notable were adventure games. And Portal's kind of, weird way an adventure game. It's, it's a puzzle game, which adventure games are. It just has a more narrowly focused uh, puzzle mechanic, I guess.
and I guess I'm just interested because obviously the game just like did so well and people just absolutely like loved it and so much about the characters and everything they just seem to resonate with. Were you aware at the time of the sort of it's got a very kind of impactful ending, it sort of feels quite meaningful and heavy's not the word, but I guess I just wonder if when you're doing that you realize that you're making something with that level of depth.
No, no. I mean, you're just trying to, well, you're trying to get through just every day, and you're making a game. There's 8 gazillion decisions you have to make because literally everything's manufactured. So no, and also because as rigorously as Valve play tests, because we were shipping the orange box, the TF2, people working on TF2, people working on episode 2, there wasn't a ton of oversight on the first Portal. Like, it was only near the end that people from Valve really kind of tuned in and were playing something near final, and
Hmm.
we started to get some feedback like, whoa, that was way better than we thought it was going to be. And plus, games are typically pretty bad until near the end, and then they start coming together. But you just try and go moment to moment, and you have these little epiphanies about, oh, this would be good here, this would be good there. I mean, I personally try not to go in with like a theme, that I'm trying to push necessarily, because you end up getting kind of pedantic sometimes about it. It's the theme typically will emerge from characters or just the things that you think are interesting, or a lot of the decisions you make are just what's going to work with the mechanics of the game.
Mm.
How is this going to fit in? What can we do with not our monetary budget necessarily, but there was, I'm going to say seven people working on Portal plus me. It was the Narbacular Drop kids plus me basically. Um, and as it started to get together or come together at the end, we got the song from Jonathan Colton, and you're just running out of resources by the end. Like at the very end, I had this idea that I wanted to do for the credits. The credits come up in the text prints, and it's like this kind of ASCII terminal thing. But everybody was too busy to do anything. So luckily, I mean, with a little bit of programming background, I was able to do that programming myself by just kind of going around stone souping it and asking people for a little help here and there. But yeah, you just start to, especially on something small like Portal, there's just decisions that are made because there's all these practical constraints on what's even possible, which
Mm.
is nice most of the time. Usually, that having these constraints helps focus your mind a little bit. When it's a complete blank slate, you do whatever you want. That's genuinely terrifying. But when there's constraints, and even in the case of Portal, all the mechanics were there, and there's certain things in place. It's like, okay, now I just have to figure out a way that to make these, connect these dots and make this entertaining. There's many less problems to solve, I guess, with more constraints.
That's what I was going to ask. Was just I'm just honing in on Portal, just but you know, but for this particular thing, what state was the game in when you sort of came on board? You know, to start building that world around it.
Most of the, if I remember correctly, most of the puzzle track was in the breaking out into the going into a fire pit and then breaking into the behind the scenes part was already there. There was no actual end narratively, obviously, because there was no narrative at all when I got there. But also just mechanically, there was nothing at the very end. But so that's basically where it was, and there was roughed in using Half-Life assets, which
Hmm.
for the most part ended up, that's what we shipped was these Half-Life sort of looking environments, even though they were, kit bashed a little bit to make it look somewhat different. We were able to get some new art in there.
And so, what was your sort of first? And this sort of comes onto this topic of and the question could just as much be world building on a budget as sort of what you were talking about, world building within any kind of limited constraint, right? Be it that the structural the order of the game is already laid out. What was your sort of first step in starting to kind of iterate on that
It was
game?
Well, so I had remembered from Psychonauts, we would do temp voices a lot, and sometimes it was just we just take people from the office or me or Tim, and for I don't know what the reason was, for some character situation I used a text to speech, and there was something funny about the text to speech, just inherently funny to me about the text to speech, and so I remembered that, and so when I started thinking about what we could do with Portal, I was like, well, why don't we just start with putting a little announcement at the beginning and end of every chamber. Or at the beginning, it may have just been at the end of the chambers as kind of little reward for, maybe there'd be a little gag or something, just a little institutional voice. And we'll use the text to speech, and then that'll be a placeholder, and we'll figure something out. We had grander ideas of having characters or actual animated characters and things. But that started succeeding. It was, people liked it, and then so you're like, well, okay, so this is working to some extent. So what if we pursue this a little bit? And then at some point, it's obvious in retrospect, but it hit us that the the game is not you fighting monsters or soldiers or whatever. It's you versus the environment. And this voice is sort of the voice of your enemy, which is the environment. So why don't we just lean into that? That the environment is already mechanically your antagonist. So why not just give a voice to it? The voice is the facility. And then things that kind of drove most of the decisions that happened after that.
Just out of interest, was it like out the gate obvious that like the facility that GLaDOS would have this kind of disregard for your life?
Yeah, I mean, it was something I was, uh, and this is not profound or deep, but I'd been thinking about this thing because right after we started on at Valve, I had ulcerative colitis, and I had a year of these 3 surgeries that were really gnarly. And when I'm sitting, I remember specifically laying in this bed after one of the surgeries, and just thinking, because everybody, when you're in the hospital, is usually nice to you, but it's very institutional. And I was just thinking, what if these people were pretending to be nice and they actually don't have my best interest at heart? Which again isn't a profound insight, but it was something I felt deeply, which did inspire, some of it. Just an institution that says it has my best interest at heart, but I suspect over time that maybe it doesn't.
And it's interesting because it sort of says it a lot as well, right? Like it's constantly repeating itself around that, whilst obviously behaving in a completely contradictory
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, and then eventually and again, the riding into the fire pit and then escaping behind the scenes was just there. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
because I was
thought
going to ask if that was there already, but that was before there was even any idea.
there was no, yeah, other than again, the story, such as it was that you escaped this death trap at the, so that, narratively, that was in there being, the Nebrakular drop kids' heads. Uh, and it was a cool beat, so we kept it, and it just seemed great to be like this voice that was kind of again institutional, and you're not even sure if it's live or recorded. Suddenly notices that you have gotten somewhere you're not supposed to get, and then becomes nervous about it, and then more directly antagonistic. So it just fit. Yeah, everything just kind of fell into place.
And is it difficult to write a good nemesis bad guy?
I mean, it's probably more difficult to write a good guy because they're less interesting. But I mean, everything, at least for me, for writing things is always hard. I'd rather just not. But yeah, it it's easier than some things, and uh, we kind of found the voice of it, well, which is this computer voice, which we might have actually gone with a text to speech program, but they were too expensive, and we also did need the voice to act at some point, and the text to speech, the artifacts are sometimes, I'm talking about, this is 2006 text. Now it's just the AI stuff is, a lot more robust, but you just weren't in control of it enough. And also, again, there was no pricing model. Nobody wrote these text to speech programs, thought about shipping them in games. Like it would have been prohibitively expensive. So we got Ellen, luckily, and also because we knew at some point, especially towards the end, she was going to need to act, and the text to speech was not going to be able to do that.
And so, again, the thing that I was just really interested to dig in with you about was like this illusion that I think good writing does, where it really makes the world feel so much bigger than whatever is being presented to you, right? And again, obviously, I think the reason why Portal is such an interesting case study for that is because it's literally like just these, white paneled rooms, right? But I just wonder from a writing perspective, and again, we talked about like with Left 4 Dead, with the papers left around, the graffiti, and the environmental storytelling that is done so well in video games. Like, are you able to sort of put into words what it is that happens when good writing can kind of tap into the imagination of a player to basically fill in like huge swathes of information that isn't being stuck in front of them visually?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is, and I think people do that. Like, I'm not a big proponent, probably because of laziness, of laying out lots and lots of like quote unquote world building stuff that doesn't go into the game. We do, my current writing partner, Jay Pinker, and I will do some, but some of it's, we try and start with the characters first and then build out what we need, and no more than we need. No more than we need, or if the artists need some information to do their job, we'll try and fill that out. But we try and go not too far out. It's kind of like, the level designers, there's doors, and they try and think about things logically, but, there's many doors and areas that you don't get to. They don't model those out just so they know where things are. But I think if you just, yeah, I'm not 100% sure how much. Some of it, it's just a gut feel. There's no like formula. Like, okay, this
Mm.
would be interesting. Like the behind the scenes, or not the behind the scenes. There's some graffiti um in Portal. There's the Ratman den, and there's a few little pieces of graffiti, and they're mainly there to just to reinforce that something may be going on here, that you are not, not everything is as it seems, or that what they're telling you is not necessarily true. Um, and we wrote or I wrote a few things about, mainly just to entertain myself or to entertain, the team, about Cave Johnson, which he doesn't appear at all in the game, and a few things about the world there. Um, and we've probably gone too far sometimes, but I enjoy just not knowing, um, having the sense that maybe there's more, but not necessarily having it all filled in. Especially
Mm.
things, there's a, famously, Cormac McCarthy, when people would ask him what ended the world in the road, he'd be like, "Did you read the book? Who cares? I don't care what ended the world." Um, and some of it was like, because it was in the Half-Life universe, we felt like addressing some of that. We had this, or I think I did, and then the team did, this kind of snobs versus slobs thing, where Black Mesa were the fancy pants, government funded people, and this Aperture was the scrappy underdogs. And so we set that up in a couple of environmental places. I mean, like you said, games are maybe the best medium for environmental storytelling, just because most games, especially of a certain type, you kind of explore the world at your own pace. So it's
Mm.
almost like wandering through a museum. You can set up little exhibits for people. And you also don't have a lot of time to have scenes of people talking, or you hopefully don't, slow the game down all the time
Mm.
to you're typically not there for the story, you're there for the game. And so you're writing in the margins, and the environment is a terrific margin to write in.
And just on that note, when you talked about like that, not going overkill, with the writing or fleshing out characters or world, like what is like what does one need to know about the character to be able to sort of start moving forward with the development of the game or story? Is it just like how much background, or like what is their objectives? Is it sort of simple as that?
Yeah, typically it may not even necessarily be that. It's like, what role will they play? And then what is a personality? Like, what role would they play in the broader story? And then what's a personality that seems like it would be interesting in that role? For instance, in Portal 2, we had Wheatley, and it took us a while to arrive at the fact that he was a moron and was very self-conscious about that. That ends up being his sort of defining characteristic. But, he we had his voice in our head. Especially, a lot of times we'll honestly start with a voice, like an actor that we're like, well, if we could get him, we like, or her, we like this voice, and so what can we do with that? Because one of the things you can't really get Daniel Day-Lewis, not because you can't get him, but game production tends to be, you sort of need to lean into what the actor is going to be very naturally,
Mm-hmm.
immediately good at, because you don't have months of rehearsal or any rehearsal. You got very limited time with the actors. So you sort of also base the character on what is going to be comfortable. There's a little bit of back and forth. Like, you might cast somebody who um, will be able to voice the character traits that you already have. But just a weird organic process of being at least for me and us, not with Portal because I was mostly by myself, but since then, and Jay sitting in a room and just trying to like, I mean, they call it breaking story, or like, okay, well, what could happen? And then you sit in a room for weeks and you talk about it and you think about it, and it's constantly on your mind, and you hope you come to some general path that you can take.
Do you find it? How do you find it talking with fans of these games? You know, about their kind of a bit like you were saying with Cormac McCarthy. You know, the fact that he's writing this book, he's got no interest in going into that particular detail of how the world ended, but that a lot of people, you know, that's the thing they're sort of transfixed on, or like the fact that, you know, Ratman, you know, is this like hugely iconic, like an iconic video game character, but is basically fleshed out from a handful of scribbles on a wall for the most part. Like it's
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's obviously uh flattering. But often I think this is the case with a lot of people that, I thought about it very, and Jay thought about it, these questions, many of them very intensely for a couple of years, and then we stop thinking about them. So it's not as fresh in our minds. Sometimes people will have knowledge or make connections that we either didn't make or have long since forgotten. Although we do revisit Aperture, you know, we have every few years in different formats. Ratman actually was Ted Kosmaka, was a writer at the time. I had actually written a little biography. I don't even, this is unlike me. I wrote a 4 paragraph little story about Ratman, which Ted took, which was never in anything, and really didn't. Maybe I showed it to Kim or something. Uh, but Ted took that and then there's a comic about Ratman, and Ted wrote the comic, not what happens in the comic, but the character Ratman, and kind of the idea that there was this schizophrenic person who got trapped in the facility and was running out of meds and was slowly losing his mind. Um, and then made the comic and fleshed that out. Uh, and there was partly because there was some thought that Ratman would appear in Portal One, and for a variety of reasons, I think mainly because we realized we had no time budget, time slash uh, artist budget to do that, to actually make a human character that would show up. Um, Other than the Chell model, which you can see through the portals. I don't even know what question I'm answering anymore, but yeah, I know about the fans. I mean, it's great, it's great, but I don't always have. They often have more information than I do about this stuff.
and I, you know, I was just again because I sometimes think about people might be listening who are interested in writing, or you know, trying to improve their craft. I just wonder if there's things that on reflection that you spent like a extraordinary large amount of time either thinking about, worrying about, or transfixed on, that you probably shouldn't have or didn't need to be doing. I mean, and maybe that's not even necessary in writing, but just in
Yeah, I
across
mean,
the board.
I mean, personally, I spend a lot of time, and I always have been this way, a lot of mental effort procrastinating until it gets to the point where it's critical, and I make myself crazy with that. My advice would be, and it's harder, is to just write, yeah, write, pace it out. Don't just wait till the end. But I don't know that other than that, sometimes you will go down a path, a specific, but this is more specific. You wouldn't necessarily know it beforehand. You've just gone down a wrong path, writing wise or story wise. But even then, a lot of times it's because another idea appears. I guess, and all this is very subjective. It's just the way I work and the things that I like. Like maybe writing some sort of Tolkien-esque Silmarillion is works for you. It seems like that seems like a waste of effort to me unless you're Tolkien, because I think 99% of the time it turns out you aren't Tolkien. And it's very hard to compete with real history when you're trying to make fake history. Uh, it's there's George R. R. Martin, there's Tolkien, and then there's a kind of steep drop off. Um, so my advice is worry about some characters, some interactions, some fun moments. Like the best one of the best pieces of advice is going a little bit farther afield that I can't remember where Jay and I we read it somewhere, and it really is true that you say you block out the scenes that you're going to write, the ones that you feel like are going to be a chore to write, you should rethink those, because if they're going to be a chore, everything's a chore to some degree, but if you're just like this is just going to not be fun to write, it's probably not going to be fun for people to experience. So that's your first indication that maybe you should think more about this particular scene. But yeah, other than that, you got to try stuff. So give yourself time, especially if you get to work in a room or with a writing partner, to just like talk. Don't just talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it all the time. Think about it all the time. We definitely both get in this laser focused mania mode for years on end, where everything that happens, everything you experience, everything you hear is run through this filter of like, the first layer is, can I use this in this thing we're working on? It's this monomaniacal focus on doing this thing. So that's important. But there are definitely things you should probably do, like learn how to work with actors, try and get some acting, maybe take some, I haven't done this myself, but maybe even take acting lessons. It's interesting. Oh, also, if you're writing by yourself, this is harder, but say things out loud. It's amazing how often, like even to this day, and even after Jay and I speak the lines to each other as we're writing, once you get in the studio, you're like, I cannot believe, like, this sounds terrible when spoken. Like, things that read well don't necessarily sound particularly good when they're acted. So yeah, I don't know. This is a random grab bag of things at this.
Oh, it's I love that thing about when you're just in that zone, and it can be for years. It's the same with filmmaking, where like so much of everything that you're hearing or seeing or doing is being run through that filter. I think for me it's often like I can't listen to music that I can't somehow like relate to the project that I'm working on. Not that it needs to be in it, but it has to somehow, lyrically or pacing wise or tonally, like I have to associate it with that, or else it's sort of no fun for me.
Yeah, and it can be I'm sort of, well, I don't even know if that's the opposite. I have this thing where I will just listen to the same song like over and over again for months in a loop while I'm working. Like it just is there in my head. It's not in my head. I'm actually listening to it, but I don't like to listen to like a variety of music. I just like the same thing over and over and over again.
And that's what I get when I'm doing that process, because it really narrows the field of what tracks are sort of like I don't know, cognitively like resonate with me when I'm thinking about a project or editing or writing or whatever. And it's a very limited. And when I get my, like whatever, my stats at the end of the year for listens, it's just kind of like, and I can look back at previous years and see what I had been playing over and over and over again. And it's always relative to whatever project was going on at the time.
Yeah, it's but I mean, I assume everybody, the only universal thing when I talk to writers, professional writers, is that none of them, if none of them actually enjoy the process of writing. But that's probably true of most people's jobs. It's the classic, you like to have written, not to actually write it,
Hmm.
just because I don't even know why. You occasionally will get in like a fugue state, you're really in the zone where it's just kind of flowing out of you, but to get there, the starting is always hard. But so I guess that would be the other thing. If if you don't like it, that's not unusual. In fact, I've never met a writer who enjoys the process of writing, uh, especially a professional one. Yeah, it's it's rough. It's more fun for me, at least, with a room full of people, or just with Jay, where you're just sort of sitting there hashing it out together. But even then, you get into modes where you're just both cranky and it's nothing's happening.
Hmm.
But once you know someone well enough, it's good to you can at some point recognize, like, we're at this point where we're not changing the we're not changing the atmosphere here today, so we should
Mm.
probably just give up and do something else. But yeah, all that all that seems very specific to me, except for the nobody likes writing. That's universal.
I mean, again, and reminds me of like editing in documentary nonfiction, where it's just like it's just a slog, and you're kind of like, we're gonna start, and when we end, we'll have something great, but in between, all we can really do is just keep showing up and stay hydrated, as best as possible, and then it's
Yeah.
like, other than maybe if you're cutting something to music, which is maybe like 2% or 1% of the overall film, and then the rest is just chipping away.
Yeah, there's a lot of grinding it out. And like I said, and I'm not sure if it's this way with movies, it probably is, that the games are just bad for a very long time, and you just need to accept it and kind of like just trust the process or the people you're working with or your own experience and talent that you probably pull it out of the fire before it ships. Valve makes that easier because the deadlines aren't tight or slash
Mm.
non-existent, because they don't have any. There's like no existential threat if something doesn't ship at a particular time, money wise. So that's helpful. But yeah, you just gotta kind of learn to live with the sort of despair that this doesn't seem good. That it will hopefully get good. Um,
Learn to live with despair. That's a
yeah,
good.
it is
That's a good pull quote.
especially if you're doing something that's supposed to be funny. People get over the funniness very quickly, and they get
Mm.
sick of hearing the same joke over and over again. Um, yeah, you just gotta, you especially, you also resist the urge to change a joke that you're pretty sure is working just because you're sick of hearing it, because you may not be replacing it with anything better. Luckily, often there's so much work to do that you're not going to do that anyway. But you do start second guessing yourself. Although I think you start second guessing yourself with any creative project,
Hmm.
one that stretches over years. You just start to be like, is any of this good? What are we doing? Like, there's so many times when the self doubt is just, well, could be crippling. But luckily, I mean, you've got people you're working with to kind of lean on, and you do play testing, so you get some idea that maybe some of these specific parts are working. But the biggest thing, especially at Valve, is just like the people you work with are working at such a high level that you're like, they're gonna kill the part that they're working on. So
Mm.
we should be fine. Um, yeah. So I guess it's like being a triathlete or something. It's like a lot of it's just mentally pushing through. Uh, in this case, it's like, yeah, it's mental pain rather than physical pain. But
I think, I mean, for me, it's often like this. Just as long as everyone doesn't bottom out on the same day, like and that we can kind of take turns as to who's.
Yeah, which is Valve's a flat structure, which means anybody can bottom out at any time. It's one of the appealing things about management or leadership is that those are the people that have to. I mean, it sucks to be them, but they can only bottom out in private. They cannot, like when I worked at Double Fine, Tim could not have the luxury of bottoming out. Like he needed to rally the troops all the time. He could privately with somebody probably despair, but you can't publicly show despair in front of the team because it will crush them. So it's kind of the burden. People talk about management or leadership as being, it's all more money and perks, but it really is there are some very significant perks you don't get, which is to to let yourself kind of have a mental breakdown.
Well, it's that thing, and again, at the times on a project, been in that position, it's like, oh, I have to be the sanest person in the room, like
Yep.
for the foreseeable, or at least, do a good impression of a good enough impression of that person, to keep others. It's a really interesting thing, actually. I think, having been in that position, having been in sort of both positions, where it's sort of the other sometimes being more like the creative lead, or not necessarily, on top of people, and more, I don't know, it's like I think I've got space in the room to be able to kind of like waver here, but when you've got a strong leadership, it sort of gives other people permission to like crack, hopefully not too much, but like,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like that's a necessary part of the process, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the leadership is there to be a calm, steadying force and encourage you to do your job as well as possible. Like on Portal 2, our project lead was Josh Wire, and he was great at remaining calm and encouraging everyone to do work without necessarily trying to impose his creative will on anything. He was just a steady hand. And he was the project lead, not creative lead. There is no real, everybody's sort of in charge of their own thing. And it was great. It was great. But I do think, again, he's still my friend. He doesn't work at Valve anymore. I think he was silently suffering. I mean, I think it broke him. He was going through a lot more than he let on. It was a very stressful thing. So, yeah, it's a rough job. I've never been a project lead, and I don't really want to be one. I just do my thing.
Do you sort of have your kind of go-to people or places or things or whatever it is to help, with the, and again, it's that thing of like, I've learned quickly that what one doesn't want to become is like just a constant complainer or downer, but just practicing letting that release valve out just a little bit, be it to my wife or
Yeah, I try not to. I've always tried never to bring it home. Like I don't complain. I don't think, hopefully, I've ever complained to my wife as bad as it sometimes got at Valve. Not bad in terms of it's a bad job, just the amount of stress that there was. Jay and I have sometimes a bad relationship where we get into a cycle of despair with each other. So that one's actually maybe not that healthy. But there's yeah, it's almost different on every project. You find the people who can give you some kind of mental support when things start getting bad. Jay and I would go on long walks just in the main. One nice thing about Valve is, it's pretty open-ended. We just in the middle of the day go out and, spend 2 hours walking around, and a little bit of exercise outside and also just a change of scenery helped. He was a heavy smoker at the time, and even that was helpful. We just get up from the table once an hour to go down so he could have a smoke. And then, there'd be the smoking crew downstairs, and shoot the shit down there for a little bit. Um, but yeah, I guess everybody's just got to deal with it. I mean, I'm making it sound like the world's most awful job, but it
No,
is,
I don't think so. I think we're talking about resilience and
yeah, and it is, there is stress. And this is, things are not really, I haven't worked on the last semi big game I worked on was Alex, but even then I was, Jay and Sean were kind of there every day, and I had already moved to Cleveland, so I would, swoop in every once in a while, and we'd be on Zoom. So the days of it being truly, uh, you know, gruelingly, grindingly difficult are, I think, past for me. Luckily, I'm kind of on the other side of that. Um, but you take everything's, everything's always a little bit of a struggle because you want it to be
mm.
good. So, but not, it's not like the old days anymore.
And just out of interest, because you talked about the thing of your early younger years of writing and just sort of wanting to kind of go off and sort of please yourself. What has been the process for you in learning how to collaborate and work with others? I mean, is that something that actually just came very naturally?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing with other people, which I think just comes from because in a weird way, just sitting around with your friends trying to make each other laugh is a strangely not that different from sitting in the writer's room trying to, there's a little bit more structure to the writer's room. Um, but once, I had a writing partner with Chet, with Tim. When in the Old Man Murray days, I would write with this guy, Sean Riley, and then finally settling down with Jay for the last 15 years. It made me realize, I think there are writers who enjoy just the solitary act of writing that I enjoy writing. Collaboration for me, I discovered was a much more pleasant experience than sitting down to write by myself. And I find it actually really difficult nowadays to re-engage the muscle to just sit down
Hmm.
quietly by myself and just write something from start to finish. I'm so used to writing with Jay at this point. Um, yeah.
And actually, you mentioned about procrastination, and I asked you about that. Is that's still that's not like something you've conquered?
No,
You've just
no. I
learned to
mean,
live with it.
I'd like to think age has made me a little bit smarter about it, but I was very good at knowing exactly when the last possible second we could start something would be infinite. Like we would do anything. And Tim would do it. I mean, writers are classic procrastinators. Like I distinctly remember working on Psychonauts and we'd sit in the room, there's stuff we need to do for Psychonauts, and instead we do almost anything to not work on Psychonauts. We'd talk about Brutal Legend, the next game. Uh, and Jay and I procrastinate. Jay's better at just not procrastinating. I think I'm the one that gets us to do it. I've gotten better at it personally. I think at some point when I was younger, there was, I think, maybe some benefit to it that the stress juices, when you procrastinated to the very last second, maybe made things, I don't know, spark. This may just be rationalizing. It was definitely unhealthy, though. It's an unhealthy way to wear. It's very stressful.
Yeah, no, that's why, when you brought it up, I thought, oh, I can relate to that like wholeheartedly. It's
You
sort of
are a
amazing that we get
procrastinator
anything
as
done.
well. Procrastinate.
Yeah, yeah, and I've gone through like bouts of it, and it's to that point where you can really start to see like, especially if you're sort of, with my work, when so much of it is, unless you sort of self-drive, like literally nothing is gonna happen. You're not gonna get, you won't be employed, you won't get work, you won't start a new project, you won't develop something. So it's that, I don't know, it's that like painful self-awareness, like I'm sat here again and I'm still not doing it. But and it's interesting with my stepkids, and I can see them struggling with that. like they know that they shouldn't, I'm not sure, but they know that they don't want to necessarily be on the sofa for the next 4 hours and they want to go and finish their homework or their studying. But like, I don't know what it is about the human like psyche that we're not built to kind of be able to pull ourselves up from our sort of the scruff of our neck to get us off our asses, you know. But I
Yeah.
suppose it's also that thing about like the next thing that comes with procrastination is the shame and guilt and self-condemnation, and then you feel even worse about yourself.
Yeah, it feels bad. And then yeah, and then you finally sit down and you do it and you're just like, why didn't I just do this earlier? It was you know, not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And unfortunately, we live in a time where the same machine that I work on is also just an endless procrastination device. There's so much to do on this little box that I have in front of me.
But yeah, yeah, it's just that thing of like, until I can come to some sort of, it's like I need self-acceptance, but then I also need to like do it. But like, I've never been able to sort of shame or guilt myself into doing something. I just sort of end up sat there feeling crap about myself.
Yeah, because you just start to, yeah, it is like a therapy session, but you know, your stomach starts to hurt. You're just like, why am I still sitting here? I should just do this. And it's the easiest thing in the world. It's a thing you know, it's hard work, but I know how to do it. I know may not be great, but I'll finish it. And, you know, I'll be able to do it. So what am I waiting for?